Now, I'm sure some of you were slightly confused by the title and thumbnail. Coalition occupied France? Is this some sort of parody of Allied occupied Germany? No, it's not. Most people associate World War II with the idea of a post-war occupation where a country is divided into occupation zones, but World War II was not the first war where such a thing happened. This video is talking about the aftermath of Napoleonic France, where there was a similar occupation. Napoleon was gone for the second and final time, and a second Treaty of Paris was being created. For 5 months before the treaty, and 3 years after said treaty, the victorious coalition occupied areas of France to keep the peace. But before we get into the details, we've got to talk about this video's sponsor, Ridge. You're probably expecting me to talk about their wallets, and those are great, but not this time. This time I'm talking about a newer product of theirs, the Ridge key case. Most of you who have keys probably use a ring, a loud, jangly, annoying ring. But you're used to it, right? I was at least, but when given a Ridge key case, it solved a problem I didn't even know I had. It can fit up to 6 keys and they fit inside it like a Swiss Army knife. Even better, just like the Ridge wallet, it has several designs and I got one matching my own Ridge wallet. I never get the noise anymore. And even better, I never get that weird moment where you squat or walk a certain way and the key accidentally stabs your leg. Don't get that anymore. If you use the code EMPEROR with the link below, you can get 10% off an order of your own key case. And seriously, get one. Thanks again to Ridge for sponsoring this video. So why did the coalition need to occupy parts of France? Well, firstly, you gotta remember the first time they defeated Napoleon and thought the war was over, he ended up coming back and trying again. So this time, they wanted to make sure that didn't happen again. So occupying places like French forts and border fortifications would be essential. Even if Napoleon himself wouldn't come back this time, they wouldn't want someone else possibly trying something. It was also going to force indemnity payments on France with the upcoming treaty, and there needed to be an incentive for France to pay. You're not likely to skimp on payments if the countries that just defeated you are still in your backyard, right? The important thing to note is that there were 2 phases of the occupation. During the first phase, between June and November of 1815, there were 10 countries that had their own occupation zones, although some of them were shared. First, we had the British zone occupying the northern coastal areas near Calais. Then we have the large Prussian zone covering a lot of central and northern France. Russia got a smaller portion of northeastern France, but also got the honor to occupy Paris. Austria, meanwhile, got a massive occupation zone in the east from Dijon to Marseille. Then there were smaller zones for Bavaria, Sardinia, and Switzerland. Then both of the German nations of Baden and Saxony shared an occupation zone in the region of Alsace. Finally, the smaller German nations of Hesse and Württemberg occupied their own zone as well. You can imagine how insane this was for France having half their country occupied, but they occupied half of Europe for a little under a decade, so they kind of had it coming. Interestingly, this occupation of France, where they had a massive demilitarization and indemnity payments, would inspire Prussia to do the same thing during the 1871 Franco-Prussian War, which of course inspired the same demilitarized Rhineland and indemnities of World War I, and so on. Some nations just never forget and love revenge, right? This occupation period was short, but there is one notable story set during it. The story is disputed, so it's likely apocryphal, but supposedly during the Russian occupation of Paris, soldiers, whenever they would eat at a local restaurant, would use the Russian word bistro, which meant quickly, asking for quicker service. Supposedly, this inspired the idea of a French bistro, a small restaurant with simple and cheap meals that could be served quicker. There is little evidence of this, and part of the dispute is that the word bistro in French didn't appear until around the 1880s, so it's likely just a coincidence, but it nevertheless became a popular folk tale of sorts that arose about the occupation. Eventually, the 1815 Treaty of Paris was signed on November 20th, and from this point onward, the occupation would change and mostly shrink. This time you only had zones along the border, specifically occupying the areas where most of the forts were. This time only 4 nations were involved, and naturally they were the big ones: Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria. Additionally, there was also a demilitarized zone between the coalition occupation zones and the rest of France. The original stipulations of the treaty planned to have these zones last for 5 years, but then the Congress of Aix-la-Chapelle occurred. The Congress of Vienna was not the only European meetup during this time. The major European powers at the time were attending what was called the European Concert, where they would have multiple congresses to try and settle any and up-and-coming problems to hopefully prevent another continental war from happening. After the Congress of Vienna, the next Congress was the Congress of Aix-la-Chapelle in 1818. Basically, during this Congress, the great powers decided to reduce France's sentences on good behavior. They had been punctual in their debt payments, and of the 700 million francs they had to pay, they had already paid over half of it. The Congress agreed to remove 20% of the remaining debt in exchange for putting interest on what was left. Then they also agreed to end the occupation zones after 3 years instead of 5 like originally planned. The agreement was signed on November 15th, and the occupation was over. You know, you gotta admire the accomplishments of post-Napoleonic Europe. Thanks to this, they never had to deal with another continental-wide European war ever again. Okay, no, that's not true. They never had to deal with another Napoleon ever. Well, okay, fine. They got to brutally suppress democratic and liberal reforms to keep the strength of absolute monarchical rule for decades. Wow, that's, depressing. I'm Emperor Tigerstar, and I'll see you guys next time.